That night, the snow made Manhattan seem quieter than it really is, and yet I still heard the distinct thud of destiny when my cab door slammed shut. The man who got in didn't look like a millionaire or a victim. He had the look of someone who had crossed a decade carrying a promise in his pocket. He sat down carefully, straightened a crumpled envelope as if it were a life-or-death document, and asked, without raising his voice, "Take me downtown near the Hudson." In the rearview mirror, there was a detail impossible to ignore, the glint of an expensive watch on a wrist clad in a simple suit, as if someone had tried to fix the past without managing to erase their origins. The stranger didn't start by saying it's been 10 years, nor did he speak of a reunion. That would come later. First, he dropped a phrase that usually precedes stories that turn our heads upside down. There are things we do on an ordinary day, and we pay for or get rewarded for them for many years. And while I merged into the avenue's flow and the city passed by in streaks of light through the window, he left loose clues like someone opening a box and taking off only the lid. A boy, a freezing night, a secret too big to fit in a name, and a celebrity who would only be revealed when everything clicked into place. The ride didn't seem like a path to an address. It seemed like a path to a truth, and I just needed to drive and listen. He had entered my taxi slowly, like someone carrying an invisible weight, but at the same time a strange lightness in his chest. I have been driving around Manhattan for over 20 years. I've had every type of passenger in this back seat, from executives crying after losing their jobs to drunk tourists singing on their way to the hotel. But that man had something different. Simple clothes, a gray suit that looked like it had been worn in dozens of meetings, shoes worn out but clean, and a folded envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket that he held onto every now and then, as if checking it was still there. His face showed 40-something years lived with intensity, deep bags under his eyes, but a sparkle in his gaze that didn't match the tiredness of his body. When he settled into the seat, he took a deep breath, looked out the window at the illuminated Times Square, and murmured more to himself than to me. It has been exactly 10 years today. I usually don't strike up a conversation when the passenger seems to be in another world, but something about that phrase hanging in the air made me ask while shifting into first gear and moving slowly through the heavy traffic of 7th Avenue. 10 years since what, if you don't mind me asking? He turned his face from the glass, looked at me through the rearview mirror with that half-smile of someone about to let out a story kept for too long, and answered, 10 years since the night that changed everything, since the night I helped a kid without knowing who he was, and today, I am going to meet him again. His voice had that mix of nostalgia and expectation that only those who have lived through a major turnaround know. I felt that tingling that taxi drivers learn to recognize. There was a good story ahead. I lowered the radio volume a bit, adjusted the mirror to see his face better, and waited for him to continue. "Where exactly are you going, sir?" I asked, more to give an opening than out of necessity since the address was already in the GPS. He looked at the envelope in his pocket, pulled it out slowly, ran his fingers over the yellowed paper as if it were a sacred relic, and said, "I am going to meet a boy who isn't a boy anymore. He is 28 years old now, but when we met, he was 18, and was lost in a way not even he knew how much." The way he said that, paused, loaded with contained emotion, made me understand that this wasn't a simple reunion of friends. It was something bigger. I stopped at the light on 42nd Street, turned my head a bit and said, "It sounds like this story is worth the whole ride. Do you have time to tell it?" He smiled, a full smile this time, and answered, "I do. And I think I need to tell it, you know, to remember that it was all worth it." As traffic crawled toward downtown, he adjusted his posture in the seat, crossed his hands over the envelope, and began, "Let me tell you how I got here. 10 years ago, I wasn't anything like I am today. I was a waiter at a crappy diner near Broadway, working 16 hours a day just to avoid being evicted from my apartment. I didn't have a big dream. I didn't have a plan. I was just trying to survive, you know how it is. And on a winter night, one of the coldest of that year, a soaked kid walked in, without a decent coat, and with a look I recognized instantly. It was the look of someone one step away from giving up on everything. His voice got lower, more intimate, as if he were reliving every second of that scene. I kept my eyes on the street, but my full attention on him because stories like this, told with that kind of truth, are rare even in my cab. He took a deep breath, looked at the street outside, and continued. I had no idea who his father was. I had no idea that shivering kid was the son of one of the biggest celebrities in this country. To me, he was just another lost kid in New York, the kind the city swallows up every day. But I did what I thought was right that night. And that, my friend, changed my life in a way I never imagined possible. When he finished that sentence, the taxi stopped at another light, and I turned my face completely back, too curious to fake indifference, and said, "You have my total attention now. Tell this story properly because I need to know how a lost kid becomes a decade-long turnaround." He smiled again, nodded, and dove into the narrative of the past. He adjusted his posture in the seat, looked at the city lights passing by the window, and began to describe that night with details only those who lived through such intensity managed to keep in their memory. It was December of 2015, he said. I was at the end of a double shift, from 6 in the morning until midnight, at Eddie's Diner, that rundown place on West 46th, near the subway exit. You know those places that smell like frying grease mixed with coffee reheated for 3 hours? Well, that's the one. I was cleaning the tables, counting the minutes to leave because rent was due the next day and I was still $120 short. The snow had started falling around 10 at night, that fine snow that sticks to the glass and makes the city seem quieter than it really is. The way he described every detail, the smell, the sound, even the temperature, made me feel like I had been there with him. The diner was almost empty, he continued, and I noticed his hands lightly squeeze the envelope while he spoke. There was just a drunk guy sleeping in the corner, an old waitress counting tips at the counter, and the cook smoking out back. I already had my coat in hand, ready to bounce, when the door opened and that kid walked in. He couldn't have been more than 18, skinny, tall, wet hair stuck to his forehead, shaking like a leaf. He was wearing a band tee, soaked jeans, and beat-up sneakers leaving wet marks on the floor. But what caught my attention the most was his face. Deep bags under his eyes, red eyes, and that empty expression of someone who spent the whole night walking aimlessly. He paused, swallowed hard, and I felt that image had marked him forever. The passenger said the kid walked in slowly, looked at the menu pinned to the wall, then at his pockets, and made that universal gesture of someone who just realized they don't have enough money. He stood there for about 10 seconds, the passenger said, looking at the menu as if doing mental math, and then started to turn to leave. But I saw his hand trembling when he touched the door handle, and it wasn't just from the cold. It was hunger, exhaustion, desperation. I had been in that place. You know, when I was 20, I got evicted and spent a week sleeping in a subway station, eating leftover snacks that tourists left behind. So I knew exactly what that kid was feeling. His voice got choked up, and I understood he wasn't just telling a story, he was exposing a piece of his own soul right there. He took a deep breath and continued. I called him back. Hey kid, hold on. He turned, scared, as if he were doing something wrong just by entering. I said, the kitchen is still open. Sit there, I'll bring you something. He looked at me with suspicion, like, what's the catch? But I insisted. Sit down. Nobody should walk around in this cold without eating anything. He hesitated but ended up sitting at the corner table, far from the window as if he didn't want to be seen. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, nothing fancy, but real hot food, and placed it in front of him. When he saw the plate, his eyes welled up with tears, but he held it back. He just murmured a thank you that was almost inaudible and started eating slowly, as if every forkful was the last good thing he was going to have in life. I slowed down because traffic had gotten tight near Union Square, turned my face a bit, and said, "You just did one of the most powerful things that exist, even without knowing. Hot food doesn't just fill the stomach, it fills hope. There are people who give up on life not because the pain is too great, but because nobody stopped to show that someone cares. You showed him, and I bet that plate was more than a meal. It was a message that he still mattered to someone, even being a stranger." The passenger nodded, wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his hand, and said, "Exactly," but I had no idea what was coming next. Because when he finished eating, He looked at me and said a phrase that changed everything. "Can I ask you a question? Do you know any place where I can sleep tonight without having to go back home?" And that was the moment, he said, that he realized this wasn't just a hungry kid. It was a kid running away from something much bigger. The passenger stared out the window for a few seconds as if gathering courage to continue, and then resumed the story with a lower, more careful voice. "When he asked me if I knew a place to sleep without going back home, I felt a tightness in my chest," he said, because the way he said go back home wasn't normal. It wasn't with anger, it wasn't with teenage rebellion. It was with fear, a deep fear, the kind that makes a person prefer sleeping on the street in the middle of winter to facing what's on the other side of the door. He said he pulled up a chair, sat in front of the kid, and asked calmly, "What happened? Did you get into a fight with someone?" The kid looked away, fidgeted with the paper napkin until he made little balls, and finally answered, "I fought with my dad. I told him some truths he didn't want to hear, and he told me some truths I didn't need to hear. And now I can't go back, not like this." The passenger described how, little by little, he pulled information from the kid without forcing it, just listening with genuine attention. He said he had left the house in the middle of the argument, took only his phone and wallet, but the wallet only had some change because he had spent almost everything over the weekend, he recounted. I asked if his mom knew where he was, and he shook his head. "My mom isn't with us anymore," was all he said about that, and I didn't push. But when I asked if he didn't want to at least send a message letting them know he was okay, he got tense instantly. "I can't," he said. "If I send a message, they trace it. And if they trace it, the press finds out. And if the press finds out, it becomes a circus." That was when I started to understand that this kid wasn't just any kid. The passenger paused, looked at me through the rearview mirror and said, "But even so, I didn't ask who his father was. Because I felt he didn't want to be treated like someone's son. He wanted to be treated like a person." He continued saying that the kid, seeing he wasn't going to be pressured to reveal his identity, started to open up a little more. He said, "Everyone knows my dad, but nobody knows him the way I know him. To everyone, he is perfect. You know, the guy everyone loves, everyone wants to take a picture with. But at home he is absent. He is always traveling, always recording, always at some event. And when he is home, he isn't really there. He is on his phone, or too tired to talk, or irritated with anything I do." The passenger said that while the kid spoke, his hands shook more and more, and it wasn't just the effect of the cold. It was accumulated rage, stored pain, loneliness disguised as privilege. I noticed he was clenching his fists under the table, that his eyes got redder with every sentence, and that his chin trembled when he tried to hold back tears. It wasn't a spoiled kid's tantrum. It was the venting of someone who had never been given the space to speak the truth without being judged. The passenger adjusted the envelope on his lap and continued. Then he dropped the sentence that made me realize the gravity of the situation. He looked at me, with those eyes too tired for his age, and said, "You know what's worse? It's that everyone thinks I'm lucky, that I have everything, but nobody asks if I'm okay. Nobody asks what I want. They just expect me to be perfect like him, to smile in photos, not to complain about anything because after all, I have money. But money doesn't hug you at night. You understand? Money doesn't ask how your day was. Money doesn't stop you from feeling invisible inside your own house." The passenger said when he heard that, he understood he wasn't dealing with fleeting teenage drama. He was dealing with a kid on the verge of a dangerous decision, the kind there's no coming back from. I saw in his eyes that thing I had seen in myself years ago, the desire to disappear, to vanish, to stop being a problem for everyone. I stopped the taxi at a red light around 14th Street, turned completely to the back seat, and spoke with a firm but gentle voice. "You did the most important thing anyone can do in that moment. You listened." Most people underestimate the power of truly listening, without judging, without interrupting, without trying to fix everything right away. Just listening is already a revolution because it makes the person feel they exist, that they matter, that their pain is real even if others don't see it. You saved that kid that night just by giving genuine attention. But tell me something. What did you do next? Because clearly he didn't go back home that night. The passenger nodded, took a deep breath and said, "No, he didn't go back." And what I did next was one of the riskiest and most correct decisions of my life. I offered him the couch in my apartment, and it was there, in the early hours, that he finally broke down for real. The passenger looked at his own hands, as if he could still see in them the weight of that decision from 10 years ago, and continued, after he finished eating and let out all that about his father, about feeling invisible. I realized I couldn't simply pat him on the back and send him out into the cold. I asked, "And now, do you have somewhere to go tonight?" He shook his head slowly and answered, "I prefer to walk around the city until dawn. I've done it before. It's bearable." But the way he said that, trying to look strong but with his voice cracking at the end, broke my heart. The passenger said he stood there for a few seconds, thinking fast, weighing risks and consequences until the memory hit hard. He himself, at 22, had spent weeks sleeping on acquaintances' sofas after losing his job and apartment in the same month. I knew exactly what it meant to have nowhere to go. I knew how humiliating it is, how scary it is, how lonely it is. So I decided right then. I looked at him and said, "Listen here, kid. I don't know who you are, I don't know where you came from, and I'm not going to ask. But I know what it is to spend a night on the street in this cold, and I'm not going to let you do that. I have a tiny apartment in Queens, a couch that has seen better days, and nothing more comfortable than that. But it's warm, it's safe, and nobody will bother you. If you want, you sleep there tonight, and tomorrow morning we see what you decide to do." The passenger described the kid's expression upon hearing that. First came suspicion, the natural kind of someone raised being warned about strangers. Then came relief mixed with something like gratitude, and finally a hesitation loaded with wounded pride. He asked, "Why? You don't even know me." And I answered the most honest thing I could think of, "Because someone did that for me once when I needed it, and because you look like you need it as much as I needed it." The kid accepted, but with a clear condition he made a point of establishing before even leaving the diner. He looked at me seriously and said, "All right, I accept. But I don't want pity favors, and I don't want to be treated like the son of anyone important. I just want to be treated like a normal person, okay?" I agreed right away, grabbed my old coat, locked the diner, and we walked to the nearest subway station. The passenger described the subway ride to Queens as silent, but not uncomfortable, with the kid looking out the dark window of the train, seeing the reflection of his own face mixed with the city lights passing fast. When we arrived at my building, one of those old 5-story walk-ups, he climbed the stairs behind me without complaining. I opened the apartment door and turned on the light, and there was my reality. A studio of 300 square feet, with a beat-up second-hand couch, a coffee table full of overdue bills, the smell of instant noodles I had eaten for breakfast, and a noisy electric heater that made the breaker trip when I used it together with the microwave. He let out a short laugh, sort of embarrassed, and continued, "I felt ashamed for a few seconds, you know, because until then I hadn't measured the contrast. I was taking a kid who probably lived in a mansion, who probably had never seen an apartment so small in his life, to sleep on my old couch that had a spring popping out on one side. But when I turned to see his reaction, expecting judgment or regret, what I saw was pure relief. He looked around, touched the couch, felt the heat of the heater, and said, "It's perfect. Seriously. It's small, but it's real. No camera, no security at the door, nobody watching. It's normal." And the way he said normal, as if it were the most valuable thing in the world, made me understand that for him, that cramped place was worth more than any mansion where he felt like a prisoner. The passenger said he grabbed an extra blanket from the closet, gave a pillow to the kid, and showed him where the bathroom and the fridge were. I said, "Make yourself at home. If you want to take a shower, there's a clean towel there. If you want to eat something, make do with what's in the fridge, which isn't much, but it's what I have." When I stopped the taxi at another light, this time around Houston Street, I turned a bit and spoke, "You offered him something no money can buy, dignity without judgment. Because there is a difference between helping with pity and helping with respect. You didn't treat him like a poor little thing. You didn't make him feel inferior. You didn't charge emotional gratitude. You just offered a safe space and let him exist without a mask. And that, my friend, is rare. There are people who prefer sleeping on the street to accepting help that comes with built-in humiliation. But yours came clean. The passenger agreed, cleared his throat emotionally, and said, "Exactly." But what happened in the early hours in that apartment was what really sealed everything. Because it was there, in the silence of 3 in the morning, that he finally broke down for real. And it was there that I gave the simplest and most powerful advice of my life. The passenger adjusted his body in the seat, as if preparing to relive the most intense part of the story, and continued. I gave a blanket to the kid, showed him the couch, and went to my corner to sleep. The apartment was so small you could hear everything, every movement, every breath. I lay there in bed looking at the ceiling, wondering if I had done the right thing, if I hadn't been reckless, if that kid wasn't going to disappear in the middle of the night taking the few valuable things I had. But something told me no. Something told me he needed that space more than I needed caution. He said he lay there in silence for about 20 minutes until starting to fall asleep when he heard the sound of the couch creaking and barefoot steps on the cold floor. I opened my eyes slowly and saw his silhouette walking around the apartment. He wasn't looking for anything, wasn't touching anything, just walking from one side to the other like a caged animal. His hands were shaking even in the heat of the heater, and his breathing was irregular, the kind of someone trying to hold back tears or control anxiety. He described how he watched for a few minutes, without making noise, trying to decide if he should pretend he was sleeping or if he should intervene, until I saw him stop in front of the small window, lean his forehead against the cold glass, and let out a sigh so deep, so loaded, that I felt it in my chest. That was when I got up, put on a t-shirt, and walked to the kitchen. I opened the cabinet, grabbed the packet of instant coffee, the cheapest kind there is, and heated water. I didn't say anything yet. I just made 2 cups of coffee, took one to him, and sat on the edge of the coffee table. He looked at the cup in my hand, then at my face, and accepted. We stood there in silence, drinking bad coffee at 3 in the morning, until he finally let it out. "Sorry, I can't sleep. My head won't stop." The passenger said he answered calmly, "No problem. I've had nights like this too. Do you want to talk about what's keeping you up? Or do you prefer to just stay quiet? Both are okay with me." It was in that moment, the passenger recounted, that the dam finally broke. The kid held the cup with both hands as if he needed the heat to have courage, looked down, and let it out. I think about disappearing for good, not just leaving home for a few days, but really vanishing, taking a bus to anywhere, changing my name, starting from scratch, because I can't take being who I am anymore. I can't take carrying the weight of his name anymore. Everyone's expectation, the pressure to be perfect all the time. I just wanted to be invisible, to be nobody, not to be the son of anyone famous, not to have to smile in photos, not to have to pretend everything is fine when nothing is fine. The passenger said the kid's tone of voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't someone making a scene. It was someone who had thought seriously about it, who had calculated escape routes, who had already searched for bus tickets. He continued, "And the worst part is that everyone will say I am ungrateful, that I have everything, that I have no reason to complain. But they don't understand that having everything materially doesn't mean having anything emotionally." The passenger said he stayed silent for a few seconds, just listening, without interrupting, letting the kid pour out everything that had been stored up for so long. After he finished, I didn't try to console him with canned phrases, didn't try to minimize his pain by saying there were people worse off, didn't make any cheap motivational speech. I just grabbed the blanket that was thrown on the couch, put it over his shoulders, and said the simplest and truest thing I knew. "Look, I don't know who your father is. I don't know what kind of life you have out there. And I won't pretend I completely understand what you are going through. But I know one thing. Permanent decisions shouldn't be made on dark nights. Tomorrow the sun rises again, and you will see everything from another angle. If you still want to disappear, fine. But don't do it today. Don't do it now. Tired, cold, without having slept. Give yourself the chance to restart, not to give up. And restarting means resolving, not running away." He said the kid looked at him with those tired eyes, processing every word, and for the first time that night, seemed to really hear something that made sense. When the taxi passed Washington Square Park, I slowed down, turned my face, and spoke with conviction. You just did what most expensive therapists in Manhattan try to do and fail. You validated his pain without offering a magic solution. Because the truth is, there is no ready-made answer for existential pain. What there is presence, listening, and the wisdom to know that the early hours distort everything. In the dead of night, everything seems worse. Everything seems hopeless. Everything seems final. But daylight brings perspective. And you offered him exactly that, time. Time to breathe. Time to think. Time not to make a decision there's no coming back from. That was more valuable than any money or connection he could have. The passenger agreed, eyes watering now, and said, that was exactly it. And to seal that, we made an agreement in that early morning. An agreement between two strangers that changed both of us forever. The passenger cleared his throat, clearly moved by the memory, and continued. After I said that about not making permanent decisions on dark nights, the kid kept looking at me for a long few seconds, as if measuring if he could really trust me. Then he let out a deep sigh and said, okay, I'll make a deal with you. I promise I won't do anything stupid until the sun comes up. I promise I'll wait at least until tomorrow before deciding anything. But you have to promise me one thing, too. I asked what it was, and he answered, promise you won't ask my dad's name. Promise you won't search, won't try to find out who I am, won't take a picture secretly, none of that. I just need to be treated like a normal person for a few hours without being anyone's son. The passenger said he extended his hand to the kid and said, deal. I won't ask who you are, and you won't give up on life until at least seeing the sunrise. Fair. They shook hands, firmly, like two men sealing a pact of honor. It was in that moment, he recounted, that something unexpected and deeply symbolic happened. The kid looked around the apartment, saw an old notebook thrown on the coffee table. It was a cheap notebook I used to write down expenses and grocery bills, and asked, can I use this? I said yes, and he grabbed a pen, opened to a blank page, and started to write. It wasn't a long text, just a few lines, but he wrote carefully, with concentration, as if every word had weight. When he finished, he turned the notebook to me and said, read it. The passenger said he read the words written with that slightly crooked handwriting of someone whose hand was trembling, and that he never forgot what was written. I, in these early hours, promise myself that I am going back to resolve things, not run from them. I will face my father, I will say what needs to be said, but I won't give up on existing just because it's hard. And I will find a way to thank the man who treated me like a person when I needed it most. The kid signed at the bottom, just with initials, and said, you can keep this. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll come back here to prove I kept it. The passenger said he kept the notebook, now with that promise written in it, as if it were a sacred document. We stayed there talking a bit more, this time about lighter things, about music, about places in New York he had never been despite living here all his life, about small dreams we had, until sleep finally hit him. He wrapped himself in the blanket, lay down on the couch, and in less than 5 minutes was fast asleep, breathing finally regular, face finally relaxed. I turned off the living room light, left only the weak kitchen light on, and went back to my corner to sleep. But before closing my eyes, I kept looking at that kid sleeping on my old couch, and I thought, I don't know who you are, but I hope with all my heart you find your way. He said he slept only a few hours, but slept in peace because he knew he had done the right thing. Early in the morning, around 6, the passenger said he woke up to the sound of the kid moving, trying not to make noise to avoid waking anyone. I got up, made coffee again, set aside some toast, and put everything on the table. He ate quickly, still with that look of someone afraid to return to reality. When he finished, he looked at me and said, I need to go now. I need to go back before it gets even worse. I agreed, grabbed my wallet, counted the last dollars I had, I think it was about $15, and gave them to him. Take the subway, go where you need to go, and remember the deal. You are going to resolve, not run away. He accepted the money, but before leaving, he did something that caught me by surprise. He hugged me. It was a quick hug, sort of awkward, but genuine. And then he said, very quietly, almost whispering, If one day I manage to get out of this, if one day my life gets better, I swear I will find you. I swear I will pay you back. Because you didn't ask for a selfie, didn't ask for an autograph, didn't try to take advantage, you just listened to me. And that is worth more than anything money can buy. The passenger described how he accompanied the kid to the nearest subway station, paid his fare, and watched him go down the stairs and disappear into the morning crowd. I stood there for a few minutes, watching the subway leave, and wondering if I would ever know who that kid was, if he was going to keep the promise to resolve things, if he was going to be okay. But deep down, I knew I probably would never see him again, and that was fine, because I hadn't done it expecting a return. I had done it because it was the right thing to do. I went back to the apartment, grabbed the notebook with the written promise, put it in a drawer, and went on with my life. But something had changed in me that night. I had learned that sometimes we are placed in someone's path not by chance, but for a purpose. When he finished this part, I stopped the taxi at a traffic light, turned my face completely and spoke, "You just proved that a true legacy isn't built with noise, it's built with silent presence in the moments nobody is watching. That kid might have left your life that morning, but you didn't leave his life. You planted a seed that would germinate in the following years. And I bet what comes now in the story is the harvest." The passenger smiled, nodded, and said, "Exactly." But before the harvest came years of waiting and uncertainty. The passenger kept looking at the city lights reflecting on the taxi glass, and his voice took on a more melancholic tone when he reached this part. After he went down into that subway station and disappeared into the crowd, I went back to the apartment and tried to go on with life as if nothing had happened, he said. But I couldn't forget. I kept the notebook with the written promise in a dresser drawer, along with the few things of sentimental value I had. A picture of my mom, birth certificate, those things. Every day when I opened that drawer to grab a sock or a t-shirt, I saw the notebook there and wondered if the kid had kept his promise, if he had gone back home, if he had talked to his dad, if he was alive. Above all, he said that in the first few months, whenever he saw a young person from afar on the street or in the subway with a similar height and build, his heart raced for a second, hoping it was him, but it never was. Life, the passenger recounted, continued being tough the way it always was. About 3 months after that night, I lost my job at the diner because the owner closed the place to renovate and never opened again. I was unemployed for 2 months, surviving on odd jobs here and there, flyer distributor, moving helper, anything that showed up. I had to move from Queens to the Bronx because rent was cheaper, and there I shared an apartment with 2 other guys I barely knew. It was a hard time, the kind where you wake up every day not knowing where the money for bread is coming from. He described this phase with harsh details. Nights he slept hungry, double shifts in jobs that paid peanuts, now and then wondering if he shouldn't give up on New York and go back to the countryside where he came from. But whenever the urge to give up hit, I remembered the kid. I remembered I had told him not to make permanent decisions on dark nights. And if I was going to give that advice, I had to follow it too, right? It was during these hard years, he said, that strange clues started appearing. I was in a cheap market in Harlem, about 2 years after that night, waiting in the checkout line, when I saw a gossip magazine on a shelf, and on the cover was a photo of a young guy, handsome, smiling in that sort of forced way of someone used to posing for the camera. Something in that face seemed familiar to me. The eyes, mainly. Those same tired eyes I had seen in the early hours in my apartment. But the hair was different. The clothes were designer, and the context was different. He was at some gala event, next to an older man I didn't identify at the time. The passenger said he stood there, holding the magazine, trying to decide if he should buy it to see if it really was him, but in the end, he gave up. I had promised I wouldn't try to find out who he was, and I am a man of my word. I put the magazine back, paid for my groceries, and left. But that image stayed in my head for weeks. Similar situations happened other times over the years. Once I was watching TV at a friend's house and a talk show was on. The host was talking to a young actor, or singer, I don't remember exactly. And again, that face, those eyes, that sort of displaced manner of someone who doesn't like exposure but is there out of obligation. My friend commented something like, "That kid is so-and-so's son, right?" but I didn't hear properly because I was processing. Could it be him? Or was I seeing things where there was nothing? I was never sure. And the more time passed, the more that night seemed like a dream, not reality. He said the notebook remained stored away, now already yellowish. The written words still legible, but the ink starting to fade. I moved apartments 2 more times, lost some things in the moves, but the notebook always went with me. It was like an amulet, you know. Proof that that night had really happened, that I had made a difference in someone's life, even if I never knew the final result. When the taxi stopped at a light near Canal Street, I turned my face and spoke with a firm but gentle voice. Do you know what is harder than helping someone? It is helping someone without ever knowing if it worked. Because most people only do good when they are sure they will receive recognition, a return, or at least feedback. But you did the right thing without any guarantee. You planted without knowing if you would harvest. And that is rare. Most give up when they don't see immediate results. But a true legacy takes time. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes decades, and sometimes we don't even live to see it. But you continued keeping that notebook, continued believing it had been worth it. And that says more about you than about anything else. The passenger agreed, wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his hand and said, yeah. And then, 8 years after that night, something happened that made my heart almost jump out of my mouth. Something that proved I hadn't imagined anything. The passenger leaned forward a little, as if the next part of the story demanded more energy to tell, and continued. It was a Tuesday night, 8 years after that early morning. I was living alone again, in a small apartment in the Bronx. Better than the previous one, but still very modest. I had managed a more stable job as an administrative assistant at a logistics company. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. I got home after a long day, reheated leftover Chinese food in the microwave, and turned on the old second-hand TV I had bought at a thrift store. It was one of those tube TVs that weighed tons, and the image flickered now and then. He described the scene with vivid details. The apartment sort of dark, only the bluish light of the TV illuminating the room, the smell of reheated food, the heavy tiredness of the body asking for rest. I was changing channels without paying much attention, just looking for something to watch while I ate, when I stopped on a talk show. And that was when it happened. The host, one of those famous late-night talk show guys, was talking to a young man. The guy must have been about 26, 27 years old at the time. Well-groomed hair, expensive but discreet clothes, the posture of someone trained to sit straight and smile at the right time. But there was something in his eyes. Something familiar that made my whole body freeze with the fork in the air. The passenger said, at first, he thought it was just an impression, that fatigue was making him see resemblances where none existed. But then the host asked a question about the guy's childhood, and he gave that half-crooked, half-sad smile I had seen before. And he answered something like, my teenage years were complicated. I had some very difficult moments. The host prodded more, making jokes, trying to pull a funny story. But the guy got serious for a second, and then he dropped the sentence that made my heart almost stop. There was one night when I was 18 that I almost made the worst decision of my life. But a stranger in New York, someone I never saw again, stopped me. He doesn't know to this day how much that mattered. The passenger described how the mug of coffee he was holding almost fell from his hand. I stood up from the couch, got closer to the TV, staring fixedly at the screen, trying to be absolutely sure. The eyes were the same. The way of speaking slowly when touching on a sensitive subject was the same. And mainly, the sincerity in his voice when mentioning that stranger. It was real. It wasn't a show script. I started to shake. I put my hand over my mouth trying to control the emotion. It was him. It had to be him. But before the host could ask for more details, someone from production signaled they were out of time, and the program cut to a commercial break. When it came back, they were already talking about another subject, something about the guy's next project. And I stood there, frozen in the middle of the living room with millions of questions and zero answers. He said he tried to search on the internet, but without knowing the interviewee's full name, without having seen the show from the beginning, he couldn't find out who it was. During the following days, the passenger recounted that he became obsessed trying to find that program again, that specific clip. I recorded everything that aired on that channel, watched random bits of talk shows hoping to see his face again, but it never aired again. And the more I thought, the more I doubted. Was it really him? Or did I want it to be him so badly that I had invented resemblances? Because if you think about it, there are millions of young men in New York, millions of similar stories. Maybe I had just projected my memory onto someone random. He described how this tormented him for weeks, until he decided to make peace with the uncertainty. I grabbed the old notebook again, looked at the promise written in that shaky handwriting, and said to myself, it doesn't matter if I never know who he became. What matters is that I did the right thing that night, and if he is okay, if he overcame what he was going through, then it was worth it. I put the notebook back and continued my life. But a part of me always kept waiting, always kept that nagging doubt in the back of my mind. I stopped the taxi around Spring Street, turned my face completely to the back seat and said, do you know what this story teaches me? That sometimes life gives you clues, not complete answers. It gives you glimpses, not confirmations. And we need to learn to live with that mystery, with that lack of perfect closure. Because not everything in life has a movie ending. Not everything has an emotional reunion scene with background music. Sometimes you do good and never know what happened. And even so, it is worth it. Even so, it matters. Because the act itself already changed you, regardless of what it changed in the other person. The passenger agreed, took a deep breath, and said with a smile starting to form on his lips, exactly. But here is where the story gets really crazy, because 2 years after that TV show, I received a call that changed absolutely everything. The passenger adjusted the envelope he was holding on his lap, ran his fingers over the paper affectionately, and continued. 2 years after that TV show I never managed to find again, I was in my normal routine, working, paying bills, living that ordinary life that has nothing extraordinary about it. It was a Thursday night, around 8, and I had just arrived home when the phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer because usually it was telemarketing or collections, but something made me press the green button. He recounted that on the other end of the line came an older man's voice, kind of raspy, saying, "Hi, is this Michael? Michael Harris." When he confirmed, the voice continued, "This is Eddie, from Eddie's Diner. Do you remember me? You worked here about 10 years ago." The passenger said he was surprised because it had been a decade since he had contact with his former boss and didn't even know if the place still existed. Eddie continued, "Look, I know it's been a while, but something arrived for you here. It's been years, actually. And I just discovered it now because I'm renovating the place again and found it in an old desk drawer. Can you come pick it up?" Curiosity, the passenger said, was stronger than any fatigue. I asked what it was, but Eddie said he didn't really know. It was just an envelope with my name. I said I'd stop by the next day after work. But when I hung up the phone, I was left with that strange feeling, that sensation that something important was about to happen. I couldn't sleep properly that night. I kept tossing and turning in bed, imagining what it could be. Was it something old from work? Some document I had forgotten? Or was it possible it had some connection with that night 10 years ago? He described the next day as the longest of his life, every hour dragging as if the clock were broken. When the shift finally ended, he rushed to the subway and went straight to the old diner's address. When I got there, I almost didn't recognize the place. It had been completely renovated, turned into a modern restaurant with a new facade, LED sign. But Eddie was still there, older now, grayer, but with the same crooked smile as always. Eddie, the passenger recounted, welcomed him at the door and took him to the small office in the back, which still smelled like fresh renovation paint. He opened an old cardboard box full of ancient documents, yellowed receipts, faded photos, and in the middle of all that he picked up a white envelope. It was sealed, with my name handwritten on the front, Michael Harris, waiter. No return address, no address, just that. Eddie said, "This was in a locked drawer of the old desk. When I closed the diner 10 years ago to renovate, I packed everything in a rush and forgot about this drawer. I only found it now when I'm taking apart the old furniture to throw away. I don't know who left it, but it has your name, so it's yours." The passenger described how his hands shook picking up that envelope. The paper was yellowed by time, but still intact. He thanked Eddie, left the place, and only opened the envelope when he arrived at a nearby square, sitting on a bench under a streetlight. When I tore open the envelope and took out what was inside, I almost fell off the bench, he recounted with a choked voice. It was a simple card, the kind sold in any stationery store, without a design, without anything elaborate. And on it, handwritten with that same handwriting I had seen in my notebook 10 years earlier, it was written, "A promise is a promise. I will still find you. Thank you for treating me like nobody ever treated me. You saved me that night, and I will never forget. When you receive this, call the number below. It doesn't matter how much time passes. I will be waiting." And below was a New York phone number. No name, no signature, nothing identifying who had sent it. But I knew. In the bottom of my heart, I knew it was him. The passenger said he sat there for almost an hour, just looking at that card, rereading the words dozens of times, feeling a mix of emotion, disbelief, and fear. Fear because after 10 years, so much could have changed. What if he didn't remember me properly? What if it was someone else? What if it was a prank? When the taxi crossed the Bowery, I slowed down, looked in the mirror, and spoke with conviction. Do you know what that card represents? It isn't just paper with words. It is physical proof that no true gesture gets lost in the universe. The fact that he left that there 10 years earlier, without knowing if you would ever receive it, shows that his gratitude was real. It wasn't a show for social media. It wasn't a social obligation. It was an emotional debt he carried and needed to pay, not because you charged him, but because he couldn't live in peace without paying it back. And that is rare. Most people forget who helped them as soon as the crisis passes, but he didn't forget. 10 years later, the promise still stood. The passenger agreed, wiped the tears starting to fall, and said, and that was why, with hands still trembling, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed that number. And what happened in the following days was more surreal than any Hollywood script. The passenger took a deep breath, as if preparing to retell the part that still made him nervous even after it happened, and continued. I sat there on that park bench, holding the card in one hand and the phone in the other, staring at the number for a good 5 minutes before having the courage to dial. 1,000 thoughts went through my head. What if it's the wrong number? What if it changed and now belongs to someone else? What if he doesn't want to talk to me anymore? But in the end, curiosity beat fear. I dialed the number, put the phone to my ear, and waited. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was almost hanging up when a female voice answered, Professional, polite, Morrison and Associates. Good afternoon, how may I help you? He said he was confused instantly because he expected to hear the kid's voice, not an office secretary. He stuttered a bit and said, Hi, I received a card with this number. My name is Michael Harris. Did someone ask for me to call? The reaction on the other end of the line, he described, was immediate and almost surprising. The lady went silent for 2 seconds, and then her voice changed completely, got more animated, almost relieved. Mr. Harris. Michael Harris. Oh my God, you called. Please hold a moment. And she put me on hold before I could even ask anything. The passenger recounted sitting there waiting, listening to that generic hold music, completely lost, understanding nothing. 2 minutes passed, which felt like 20, until the line came back and another voice came on. This time male, older, formal. Mr. Harris, my name is David Morrison. I am a lawyer. You have been sought after for quite some time. Can we schedule a meeting in person? It is important, and my client would very much like to speak with you personally. The tone of voice was polite but firm, the kind that doesn't accept no as an easy answer. Michael said his heart raced instantly. I asked who his client was, but the lawyer said he couldn't reveal it over the phone, that it was a matter of privacy and security. He said that if I could show up at his office in Manhattan next week, everything would be explained. And then he said something that caught me by surprise. Do you need help with transportation, sir? I can send a car. Or if you prefer, I can cover your subway and meal costs. We want to make it as easy as possible for you. He described how that sounded strange, almost too good to be true, and immediately thought it was a scam. My first reaction was suspicion, because who offers to pay for transportation and food for a stranger? I told the lawyer I would think about it and call back. But he insisted, "Mr. Harris, I understand your caution, but I can guarantee this is legitimate. My client spent years trying to locate you. This number was left a decade ago, and we almost lost hope that you would call. Please, give this a chance." The sincerity in his voice, Michael said, ended up weighing on the decision. After thinking for a whole day, consulting a friend who understood legal matters to be sure it wasn't a scam, Michael finally accepted. I called back the next day and scheduled the meeting for a Monday morning. The address they gave me was in a mirrored building in the heart of Manhattan, near Madison Avenue. One of those places you walk past and think, important people work here. On Sunday night, I barely slept. I laid out my best suit, which was already kind of loose because I had lost weight, but was still presentable. I shined my shoes, cut my hair, shaved. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I wanted to be minimally dignified, you know. He described the morning of the meeting as surreal. He woke up 2 hours earlier than needed, drank coffee without being able to eat anything because his stomach was in knots from nervousness, took the subway to Midtown Manhattan, and stood in front of the building for about 10 minutes before having the courage to enter. When I finally went in, past security, who already had my name on a list, which made me even more nervous, took the elevator to the 12th floor, and stepped out into a hallway with thick carpet, glass walls, expensive paintings. A receptionist welcomed me with a professional smile and took me to a small but elegant meeting room with a view of the street, polished wood table, leather chairs. She offered coffee, water, said they would arrive in moments. And I sat there, alone, hands sweating, heart beating out of rhythm, holding the old envelope I had brought with me as proof I wasn't crazy. The passenger looked at me through the mirror and said, and then the door opened. And when I saw who walked in, my world turned upside down. I stopped the taxi at a red light, turned my face completely, and spoke. This is the moment that changes everything, isn't it? The moment the past and present meet head-on, and you realize that gesture from one night really crossed a whole decade. He agreed, eyes shining with emotion, and said, "Exactly." And what I saw on the other side of that door was impossible to prepare for. The passenger's voice got shakier when he reached this part, as if he were still processing the intensity of that moment even so long after. The meeting room door opened slowly, and in walked a young man in an impeccable suit, well-cut hair, confident posture, but with a somewhat nervous smile on his face. He must have been about 28 years old, tall, broad shoulders, but it was the eyes that made me recognize him instantly. Those same tired eyes I had seen 10 years ago, only now shining differently, with life, with purpose. He stopped at the door for a second, looked me up and down as if confirming it was really me, and then opened the most genuine smile I have ever seen. "Michael," he said, and his voice came out choked up. "You have no idea how long I waited for this moment." Michael recounted that he stood up from the chair without even realizing, legs shaking, and before he could say anything, the young man crossed the room in 3 long strides and hugged him tight. It was a hug that knocks the wind out of your lungs, you know. A hug of deep gratitude, of emotion stored for a whole decade. He squeezed me tight and said in my ear, "Thank you. Thank you for not leaving me alone that night. Thank you for not treating me like a trophy. Thank you for listening to me when no one else would listen." And then he pulled away a little, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and asked for us to sit. Michael described how they stayed there, facing each other, for a few seconds in silence, just looking at each other, processing the reunion. He started speaking. "I looked for you for years. I went back to that diner dozens of times, but it was always closed for renovation or had already turned into something else, and nobody knew where you had gone. I left that card with my number there because it was the only address I had, and then I waited. Years and years thinking you would never receive it, that it had gotten lost, that I would never be able to thank you in person." The young man told, Michael narrated, how that early morning on the cramped couch in Queens had completely changed the trajectory of his life. He said, "That morning when I left your apartment, I went back home. I faced my father. I said everything I needed to say, without running away, without shouting, but firmly. And for the first time, he really heard me. Not because I changed, but because I was different. I was more secure, more centered. And do you know why? Because you showed me that I mattered, not for being the son of who I am, but for being a person. You didn't ask for a photo, didn't ask for an autograph, didn't try to use me. You just gave me food, shelter, and advice, and that saved me. Michael recounted that in this moment he finally asked the question he had kept for 10 years. Who is your father? And the young man smiled, took a deep breath, and revealed the name. An American celebrity so big that anyone in the country would recognize him instantly. A music legend, a cultural icon. When he said the name, my jaw literally dropped. He wasn't just famous. He was famous. And suddenly everything made sense. The fear of the press, the pressure, the feeling of invisibility. But the most surprising part, Michael said, wasn't discovering the identity, it was what came next. He said, Michael, I didn't bring you here just to say thank you. I brought you because I want to give back, for real. Not with money thrown into your account so I feel good about myself, but with something that changes your life the way you changed mine. And then he opened a folder that was on the table and started showing documents. First, full payment of all my debts, credit card, old student loans, everything paid off. Second, a stable job offer at the foundation he had created, with a decent salary, full benefits, something I would actually like to do. And third, seed capital for me to open the small business I always dreamed of having, a mechanic shop specializing in restoring classic cars, which was my passion since childhood, but I never had the means to invest in. Michael said he was speechless, just looking at the papers, trying to process if that was real or a dream. I stopped the taxi completely, put on the hazard lights, turned my whole body to the back seat, and spoke with a firm and emotional voice. This isn't charity. This is justice. Because you planted dignity that night, and now you are harvesting multiplication. The difference is, he didn't give you a handout to feel important. He gave you structure so you can build with your own hands. He paid the debts that tied you to the past, offered work that sustains you in the present, and gave capital for you to build the future. This is true retribution. And do you know what is most beautiful? It's that he waited 10 years, searched for you tirelessly, because his gratitude was real. It wasn't a show. It was a debt of the heart he needed to pay to live in peace. Michael agreed, with tears falling now without control, and said, and that was exactly what I felt, that everything had been worth it, that cold December night 10 years ago had planted a seed that was now bearing fruit bigger than I ever imagined possible. Michael adjusted his posture in the taxi seat, held the envelope more firmly, and his voice took on the tone of someone finally connecting all the dots of the story. After that meeting, after signing the papers, after hugging him one more time before leaving that office, I walked through the streets of Manhattan for hours, just walking, processing, trying to believe that had really happened. And today, 10 years after that early morning on my couch, I am going to close the last detail of the shop contract. The space is already rented, the equipment has already been bought, and next week I open the doors of my own business. He looked out the taxi window, seeing the New York lights passing by, and continued, and this here in my pocket, this envelope I'm carrying, is the final contract, the last signature missing. It is the document that makes it official that I, Michael Harris, former waiter at a rundown diner, former guy who barely had enough to eat, am now the owner of my own future. And it all started because I offered a plate of food and an old couch to a lost kid. The taxi was getting close to the destination, and I felt the story was closing. Michael looked at me through the mirror and said, "You know what's craziest about all this? I don't feel like a hero. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what any person should do. I treated another human being with dignity when he needed it most. I didn't expect recognition, didn't expect a return, didn't calculate cost-benefit. I just did it because it was right. And somehow, the universe returned that multiplied by 1,000. But if I could go back in time, I would do it all again, even if I never received anything in return, because what I gained that night wasn't a promise of future reward. It was the certainty that I was still a good person, even when life was hard, even when I barely had enough to eat. That nobody takes away from me." The way he said that, with genuine humility, without arrogance, without self-pity, made me understand that his true prize hadn't been the money or the opportunity. It had been the confirmation of who he really was. I slowed down because we were a few blocks from the final address and asked something that had stuck in my head. "And did you guys keep in touch after that reunion? Did you become friends?" Michael smiled and answered, "We talk every now and then. We aren't best friends or anything because our lives are very different. He travels the world, has a packed schedule, lives in the spotlight. I'm here, building my business, living my simple life. But there is deep respect between us. He sends me a message every anniversary of that night, always with the same phrase, 'Thank you for reminding me that I mattered.' And I reply, 'Thank you for reminding me that no gesture gets lost.' It's all we need to say. The rest was already said 10 years ago, on that old couch in Queens." He looked at the watch on his wrist, that expensive watch I had noticed at the start of the ride, and that now made sense, and said, "And in 15 minutes I am going to sign the last paper and make it official that life really can take impossible turns." The taxi stopped in front of a commercial building downtown, near the Hudson, exactly where Michael had asked to go at the start of the ride. He put the envelope inside his jacket, grabbed his wallet, took out the fare money and a generous tip, and handed it to me with a smile. "Thanks for listening to the whole story," he said. "I needed to tell someone today. I needed to remember where I came from before walking in there and signing these papers. Because it's easy to forget, you know. It's easy to get used to comfort and forget the days you had nothing." He opened the door, put one foot out, but before leaving completely, turned to me and said, "Can I give you a piece of advice? Never underestimate the power of a simple gesture. You never know when a plate of food, a kind word, or an attentive ear will change the complete trajectory of someone's life. Sometimes we are placed in a person's path not by chance, but for a purpose. Don't let it pass." He waved, closed the door, and walked toward the building entrance. I stayed there, stopped, engine running, watching him enter the lobby and disappear into the elevator. The taxi was empty now, but full of everything I had just heard. I put my hands on the steering wheel, took a deep breath, and stayed there for a few more minutes, just processing. New York continued noisy outside, horns, sirens, people running, but inside my taxi there was a heavy silence, the kind that comes after a story that moves us. I looked through the rearview mirror at the empty back seat, where minutes ago sat a common man who had done something extraordinary without even realizing it. And I thought to myself, how many of these stories have I missed by not paying attention? How many passengers entered and left this seat without me really seeing them? Michael taught me, without knowing, that every person carries a story and that sometimes they just need someone willing to listen. I started the car again, turned on the available sign, and moved forward through the city. But something had changed in me too. Now I'm talking to you listening to this story. How many times have you stopped doing a simple gesture because you thought it was too little? How many times have you thought, "This won't change anything," and moved on? Do a real test in your life this week. Listen to someone without looking at your phone. Buy a coffee for someone who is visibly broke. Ask the clerk's name and use their name. Offer practical guidance to someone lost, without promise of return. If this story reminded you that character shows up in the small scenes, hit that like button, share this with someone who is losing faith in goodness, and subscribe to the channel with notifications on, because here, with every ride, there is a story that can flip a switch inside you. Comment "Promise kept" if you believe that no true gesture gets lost. See you on the next ride.